What is going on, everybody? It is Dylan with DFS, bringing you a brand new video. Today's video going over Week 3's two-game Monday slate. So we're already in Week 3, and we're getting a double slate, and I love it. I love a two-game slate over just a one-game showdown. I think the ownership is, a little more spread out. It makes some things interesting, and on this slate, we get some good options. Uh, Quarterback, wide receiver has a lot of options. Running back, I think, has a couple key pieces. Tight end and defense don't look too pretty, but the way this season's been, those two positions have been pretty random. Tight end's been pretty bad this season, and defenses have just kind of been all over the place as far as fantasy points. Some teams might have a good game and just not get a lot of good fantasy points. So, really quick before we get into the video, just a recap of the main slate. My double up line, pretty much. So every week I go over this line for you guys so you guys can see what I went with. And so far I'm 3-0 on the season of cashing on the massive double up. It's a single entry, so this isn't like, I find one line that cashed in a contest. No, this is the massive double up single entry, $25, right? 4,500 entries, top 2,000 cash. Finished 687, 19 points above. Just went with Jared. I went with the Detroit Arizona game, and it looked really good. 30 points in the first half. Looked like it could be a good game. Laporta got hurt in the second quarter, which really hurt me. I invested a lot in a tight end, and it didn't pay off. Went with the San Fran chalk in Mason and Ayuk. Mason didn't really pay off for his 6,200 price point. Only 10 points, but at 83%, that doesn't hurt. Ayuk, Juwan Jennings had a monster explosive game. 48 points. Brandon Ayuk only 9.8 there. Marvin Harrison, I guess, sort of paid off. I don't really like basically 2.5 times value. But Olave paid off at his price point. 20 points at 6,300. I hit a defense for once. That usually doesn't happen with my lines, but went with Denver against Tampa, 15 points there. And then Roma Dunze was my value smash at 4,200. Roma Dunze got 26 DraftKings points. Really good game out of him. Went with Cam Akers, right, just to allow me to get a lot of studs around the rest of my roster. Pretty balanced, right? I didn't get anybody above 8K. But our Fanduel line's the same thing. Fanduel, we are 3-0 on that. Cashed in all of the double ups. So if you guys are interested in joining us, click the link to our Discord where you can find our subscription package. And you guys are able to get my spreadsheet, right, that has quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, defense, where it gives out, each kind of category of who I like and don't like on the slate. So, but now let's get into why you guys are here, the two-game slate. So, starting it off with quarterbacks, this is on DraftKings and FanDuel. Showdowns, I like to do it. On main slates, it's pretty hard. There's a lot more stuff that goes into it, and I just think it's very difficult to navigate. I just stay on DraftKings. But for the showdown, I do DraftKings, FanDuel, so I have the pricing on both sites, and you guys can see the differences in pricing on both. So Josh Allen is a like for me, 7,800 on DraftKings, 9,200 on FanDuel. And the way the slate is, 9,200 is very affordable on FanDuel. Usually you get some wide receivers that are pretty steep priced, but the wide receivers are very affordable. The tight ends are very affordable, and the defenses aren't too bad themselves as well. So Josh Allen at 9,200, I know it seems steep, but it's very doable on FanDuel. DraftKings, I think it's a good price, but the pay down to Joe Burrow, 1,500, and then if you're going even Jane Daniels, 1,800. Both of those are playable. But Josh Allen, Jacksonville's been pretty bad against the pass. Obviously, lose one of their corners. Darnell Savage out again. And the Bills have been pretty successful just doing what they need to do to win games. Week 1, a huge comeback. They're able to throw the ball a lot last week against Miami. Tua goes down. Bills had a big lead. They just pretty much run the ball and control the game that way. And this one, if Trevor Lawrence can do some Trevor Lawrence type things, not like they did against Cleveland per se, but kind of against Miami, this could be a good game. Obviously, have the lines right here. Buffalo 5.5 favorites, over under at 45.5, so kind of favoring the Bills. Josh Allen just always a play. He's just a monster for fantasy, not just in the pass game but the run. But I like all the advantages for Buffalo this week. It's just if Trevor Lawrence can do some Trevor Lawrence type ceiling games, right? This is going to have to be one. The Bills defense, I'm still very skeptical on the Bills defense. Obviously, week one, they give up a lot of points, but the way the Cardinals got points, I wouldn't necessarily say was against defense. And then last week, Tua struggled against Buffalo, got hurt, and Miami was pretty much done from there. So it's very hard to assess the Bills defense. Trevor Lawrence has a lot of weapons, though. Obviously, Evan Ingram's out, but they still have a pretty good wide receiver core, I'd say. But I'm just not targeting him. Obviously, he's the cheapest on both sides, so if you wanted some leverage, that's where to go, right? 300 cheaper than Daniels on DraftKings, 200 cheaper than Burrow. But going to Joe Burrow in this matchup against Washington, Washington's been very bad. I've said their defense has been very bad since the offseason. They just did not bring in anybody in the secondary to replace who they lost, who still was bad. And yeah, Joe Burrow is just 6,300 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's the third most expensive, and he's only $200 cheaper than Trevor Lawrence. So I like him on both sides. I think this game is a great bounce back opportunity for the Cincinnati Bengals to start their season. Obviously 0-2 facing the 1-1 Commanders. They are 7.5 point favorites in a 47 over under. And he gets T. Higgins back. That's a huge plus. You saw they honestly should be 2-0. Touchdown should have been a touchdown week one against New England. Last week they stopped Kansas City, but Kansas City got that call and went their way. But just against this Washington defense, I really like Joe Burrow and the Bengals. So if I had to pick one just for savings wise, on DraftKings, I'm definitely okay with taking Burrow over Allen. It's a $1,500 difference. Like I said, the prices are good though, so you don't need to. It's just I prefer it. On FanDuel, I'm totally okay with going Josh Allen. Obviously, it's $1,800 on FanDuel, but you also get more money on FanDuel. And like I mentioned, the wide receiver prices on FanDuel are really cheap this week. So I think it's very doable with Josh Allen, especially if you're trying to stack. And then Jaden Daniels on DraftKings, I have as a value. FanDuel, I just would prefer Joe Burrow. The reason why is Washington hasn't been able to find a lot of success in the pass game. But the two things I will say is Cincinnati is down, should be down both of their nose tackles in this matchup, and they're also going to be down a safety. That's 3 starters gone from Cincinnati's defense, who has kind of been shaky, right? New England was able to move the ball quite well, especially in the run. And then last week, the Kansas City Chiefs were able to put up 26 points against them. So 3 starters being out is definitely a huge blow for the Bengals defense. So Jaden Daniels rushing upside at 6K on DraftKings. I think he's a good option if you wanted to get cheaper than Allen and Burrow. Moving on to running backs, one of the weakness the Bills have had is against the run. Devon Achane last week, week 1, James Conner. Now we get Travis Etienne without a tight end. So kind of like the checkdowns to go to Travis Etienne in this matchup. Second most expensive on FanDuel. James Cook is more expensive on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, they're going Etienne over James Cook. So, Bills, like I said, Bills defense is just so hard to really assess of how they look. So, Travis Etienne getting a good amount of volume is definitely doable in this matchup. Like I said, Trevor Lawrence and that team has got to have to move the ball. Maybe a turnover happens, something goes their way, and they're able to try to use Travis Etienne and as a dual threat. I like him in this matchup for it. James Cook against Jacksonville. We were all concerned about James Cook's touchdowns this season, and it balanced out last week, definitely for sure. And this one being able to be used in the receiving game, not just the rushing game, but even in the red zone. He's got the same amount of red zone carries as Josh Allen, and that's kind of what we hope for. On DraftKings, like I said, you're getting him $200 cheaper, so if you wanted to go Cook over ETN on DraftKings, makes sense. FanDuel, if you wanted to go ETN over Cook, that makes sense. Kind of where we hit some of the values is Brian Robinson against the Bengals. I mentioned the Bengals missing two of their defensive tackles, which is a huge blow. Teams have been able to run the ball against Cincinnati, so I really like Brian Robinson. He's gotten the goal line work. He's actually split it with Austin Eckler, and it's kind of even. That's why I have Eckler as a value here. $500 cheaper on DraftKings, only $300 cheaper on FanDuel. So for the PPR bonus, maybe you want to go Austin Eckler versus the half PPR. You want to stay with Brian Robinson. And Brian Robinson has been using the passing game too, so it's not like he's not getting some of those targets out of the backfield as well. So I really like Brian Robinson. And then Zach Moss, 5,600. Kind of thought Chase Brown was going to take the running back spot for this team, but Zach Moss, especially in the red zone, has been their guy. So if you're going to target a Bengals running back, Zach Moss kind of seems like the likely guy to go for. Moving on to wide receiver, Jamar Chase, the most expensive guy by $1,600 on DraftKings, on FanDuel $2,000. And the next most expensive guy is his teammate, T. Higgins, that's just coming back. The matchup for the Bengals pass catchers is amazing this week. I'm going to be very upset if Cincinnati's not able to pass the ball against this Washington team. Every team pretty much has run a good amount of zone, except for, I think, Cincinnati. Out of all four of these defenses, Cincinnati's run the most man. Everyone else is in like the top 10 for zone coverage. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, these guys dominated, especially T. Higgins. He's a big reception guy. So I'm looking for the Cincinnati Bengals pass catchers, the pass game with Joe Burrow to be hopefully at an all-time high, right? I hope this is a really good bounce back. Terry McLaurin against the Bengals. Bengals just have played the pass pretty good. Have yet to see Jaden Daniels really, really have a connection with Terry McLaurin yet. So I'm not really willing on this slate to go Terry McLaurin. I just think he's too expensive with other options out there, right? Khalil Shakir, $5,500. On FanDuel, Khalil Shakir's cheap. He is cheap for technically being the Bills' number one guy. Like, just as of right now, being the number one guy for the Bills. He's the most expensive on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, you get Keon Coleman at $6K, Curtis Samuel at $5,200, Mac Hollins down there at $3,100, $4,100 on FanDuel, but Shakir's just too cheap on FanDuel in this matchup, right? We know it's half PPR, so I guess you could say that, but just as a whole, $5,500 for the Bills' number one pass catcher against a Jaguars defense that's given up quite a bit in the passing game. I just like his price point. On DraftKings, I like Christian Kirk at $5,200. On FanDuel, I'd rather go Brian Thomas. He's just $200 cheaper. I just kind of like that on FanDuel. The DraftKings, the PPR, I'd rather go Christian Kirk. I think Brian Thomas has the yardage upside, but Christian Kirk kind of has that reception upside. He's got the best matchup as of right now for Jacksonville pass catchers. Brian Thomas has just looked like a stud for him. He's just got a rougher matchup. So that's why in DraftKings, I like Christian Kirk. FanDuel, I just would rather pay $200 cheaper for Brian Thomas or go other options here in this one. Keon Coleman, if you want to get cheaper and go Keon Coleman $4,800 on DraftKings versus $5,500, that's fine. $700 pay down if you wanted to run that stack, right? You're paying $7,800 for Josh Allen. If you want to get a pass catcher, it's $48. It's honestly very cheap if you wanted to run both Shakir and Keon Coleman. You're looking at what, 10-3 for both receivers plus $7,800. So kind of cheap, honestly, versus, if you're doing the Cincinnati stack, you're more expensive somehow. I don't know, but you're a little more expensive there. But on FanDuel, Khalil Shakir is cheaper, $600 cheaper. I just prefer Shakir. Coleman's pretty expensive on FanDuel in this slate, so I'd rather go somewhere else. Curtis Samuel gets on the field. He's good. He's just getting out-snapped by Mac Hollins. MVS is kind of splitting snaps, so if Curtis Samuel has a good game, he has a good game. I'm just not willing to take the risk on that, though. It's just too risky for me, in my opinion. Yosivas is still going to be on the field. Him and Irwin, I imagine, are in a split. I don't think the slot is fully locked up by one guy. I think they're going to try to difference, but Yosivas is probably going to be the third wide receiver for him. On FanDuel, I like him. On DraftKings, I love him, though, at 4,300. He's just a great value. If you wanted to double stack with Joe Burrow and you wanted to go either T. Higgins or Jamar Chase with Yosivas, he's cheap, right? On DraftKings. FanDuel, a different story. 5,200 is still cheap. Don't get me wrong, for like a main slate. But with some of the other prices here, if you want to target the third wide receiver for Cincinnati, you can. It's just on DraftKings. I prefer that. Gabe Davis on DraftKings is a value just because of the difference. Brian Thomas, 4,900. Christian Kirk at 5,200. And you're paying $1,000 cheaper for Gabe Davis. FanDuel, he's just too expensive on FanDuel, right? You get Thomas, that's cheaper, and $100 more, and you get Christian Kirk. Gabe Davis has gotten more of the red zone work than the other two, so you can take that in consideration. It's just with the full PPR, I'd rather have Gabe Davis than the half PPR on FanDuel, especially for the price point. If I'm looking at anybody for the Washington pass catchers, it's Luke McCaffrey. It's not great, but for his price point on both sites, if you wanted to get some exposure to a Washington pass catcher, he's the option. And then Matt Collins, value on both sites. He's getting the third most snaps on that team. We've seen him get some red zone work. We've seen him just get some couple receptions there. First price point, I think it's worth going after, but other than that, there's not much. Tight ends, I only really have two tight ends. If anybody else, like Mike Gesicki, who Hudson's out, so Mike Gesicki's kind of the guy there. Washington's just played tight ends good. Like, tight ends fantasy points haven't been good for pretty much anybody, but if I'm going to anybody, I'm paying up for Dalton Kincaid, who has a rough matchup against Jacksonville, or I'm just playing the safe play, making sure I could stack the rest of my lineup and playing Strange, who's 2,700 on DraftKings, 4,100 on FanDuel. That's kind of my two options I'm going with. And then defense, DraftKings, I like Bengals. They're the most expensive, but on FanDuel, they're the cheapest. So you get a huge discount on the Bengals. Bengals haven't really gotten to the quarterback too much this season, but you're playing a rookie quarterback on primetime. And then Bills just going against Jacksonville. But on FanDuel, I think it's Cincinnati. You might as well just pick the cheapest defense here. DraftKings, you can pretty much go anywhere. $600 price tag difference really doesn't mean much. It's a defense. You're just hoping something happens. So hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Like I mentioned earlier, if you guys are interested in joining us, the link for our Discord is in the description down below. And I will see you guys in the next one.